What's up guys, it's Justin here, and today I'm here to talk about Apple's new iPad, which is geared towards students and education systems, as it is their entry-level, kind of low-price tablet. Although there isn't any major new changes, Apple really didn't have to do that much this year because the tablet market is already their market for the most part. Like, whether or not you're an Apple fanboy, you look at the other tablet options available on the market in the similar price range and the platform, which I believe is the most powerful kind of feature, there really isn't anything to pick from aside from the iPad, and the main competitor to the iPad in an education system would be the Google Chromebook. As a university student right now, I don't exactly see that many people with tablets, to be totally honest, but I remember back in my high school, they did use iPads, and for the most part, they were powerful in many ways because of the apps that were supported with curriculum. But it was also one of those things where people would just use them to send iMessages to random numbers from the school tablet, and people were never actually doing work on them. Some might argue that the Chromebook is more useful for school systems, whereas the iPad is more of a personal device. But today I'm going to try to outline the changes that they made, including the Apple Pencil support, and whether or not if you are a student in high school or university, you could actually use the iPad as your primary device. If you guys don't already follow me on Instagram and Twitter, please do. I've been trying to post more Instagram photos lately and just some behind the scenes stuff. And if you guys go ahead and drop a like on some of my photos, I always try to check out some of your accounts as well and also leave some likes on your photos. So yeah, everything is going to be linked down below. So when it comes to design, everything is pretty much the same as the previous year. The screen size is the 9.7-inch model with the same size bezel, the thickness is the same, so if you have previous generation accessories, that is a good thing. So in this case, I have Logitech's Slim keyboard, and I believe that for the most part, to take advantage of the iPad as a student device or something you take to class, you're going to want a keyboard for it. So I'm also going to talk a bit about this keyboard later in this video. The tablet itself weighs in at just over 1 pound, which is awesome, and this year it is available in 3 different colors, including silver, the gold, and also space gray, and the gold is a new color. As for hardware, you have Apple's A10 Fusion chip, and it is very well optimized. So from my experience, doing everyday tasks was no problem, but multitasking worked pretty well, and even some graphics stuff, I didn't notice any issues at all. But if you're going to be doing a ton of video editing on iMovie, for example, or Photoshop with a ton of layers, then the iPad Pro is probably going to be your better option, despite it being significantly more expensive. The display itself is a 2048 by 1536 resolution with a standard refresh rate, a non-laminated display, so you do notice that there is a small gap between the glass and the screen. And for the most part, the display is perfectly fine for 95% of people. It is bright enough, the colors are great. But if you do compare it to the iPad Pro, obviously it is going to have a better screen. It has the faster refresh rate, which is pretty noticeable and very nice if you're using the Apple Pencil. But the laminated screen makes it look almost stickered onto the iPad. And there is also True Tone support on the iPad Pro, which adapts to different color lighting situations based on where you are, which this iPad does not have. For the price point though, I believe that is perfectly fine, so I'm not trashing Apple for that. One of the best new additions this year though that I think will be very beneficial for education institutions especially, or anyone who just wants to get into art, is the support for Apple Pencil. So previously the Apple Pencil was just something that worked with iPad Pro, and despite this pencil costing like a third of what this iPad costs, it is a very effective tool. And for especially younger generations, or if you have kids around the house who want to draw on a tablet and stuff like that, then I think the Apple Pencil is a great support that this iPad has added. Apple has of course done an incredible job with the Apple Pencil. It is very responsive, it is very accurate, and the pencil itself is pretty light and nice to use. The only complaint about it aside from the price point is really the way it charges. I'm clearly not the best writer here, but I will say that this pencil is so fun to use. This year, the spec bump is also to Apple's A10 processor, which is quad-core, clocked in at 2.34 GHz, paired with 2 GB of RAM. As for performance, like I mentioned earlier, for everyday tasks and for most people out there, you're really never going to push the iPad to its max. If you're doing word processing and just some computing, you're going to be perfectly fine. But if you're someone who does graphics processing, although this iPad is able to support that, if you do it a ton paired up with multitasking, then you might want to consider the more powerful iPad Pro. For my personal uses though, I never was able to push this tablet to the point where I noticed significant lag. But But I think it's fair to say that the most powerful thing about this new iPad is the app support. Apple is second to none in terms of tablet dedicated support. And if you've noticed from Android tablets, they use the same apps that you're going to find on the smartphone. Whereas on the iPad, because of the size of the platform, there is just so many apps that have been made just for the larger form factor, and that really does make or break the experience. Whether it's the educational apps, the database apps, as well as information processing apps, art apps, like what Adobe has done, the dedicated app support paired up with kind of the user-friendly experience found in iOS is the main reason why I still have an iPad. So for a college student, you're able to do all of your documents here, make your PowerPoints, do some word processing, but at the same time be able to use all of your social media apps and also watch video on the tablet. All of that while coming in at a base price point where if you compare it to a computer at that same price, you're really not able to get anything that is effective or powerful in optimization enough to support certain apps that the iPad can. One thing that I definitely recommend you get with the iPad though, and this is not sponsored or anything, is a Logitech Slim Folio keyboard. Apple didn't actually release a first-party keyboard for this tablet, and that is something that I think they should have done, but the alternative that I found is possibly better than the one that Apple makes for the iPad Pro, while coming in at a price that is about what you should expect to pay for a keyboard. This one not only houses the iPad, but has a full-size keyboard with all of the keys you're going to need. It connects via Bluetooth, and the battery life is up to 4 years. The magnets set it at a position that is very comfortable, but most importantly, as someone who does do a lot of typing, I found it very comfortable to use, even as a full-time device. You're able to easily fold it up and just toss it in your backpack, and you're good to go with essentially everything you need in a small form factor. When it comes to battery life, the iPad is also great. I was able to get 8 to 9 hours on regular use, and that was just doing basic tasks, some word processing, emails, the typical social media browsing for most of the day. But if you're watching some videos and stuff, you should be able to stretch that even further, and if you're doing Photoshop or iMovie, then the battery life is going to run out faster, especially if you have to do some rendering. Personally, what I use iPads for is to do some basic Photoshop touch-ups for photos if I need to deliver it fast through VSCO and Lightroom, but also some word processing as well, reading some documents, and also editing some PowerPoints here and there. And occasionally for fun, I'm going to try to draw and design some stuff, but I'm not the best at it. Even though we are getting weirder as a society as time moves on, you still shouldn't be taking photos on your iPad in 2018, but if you really need to, this iPad has an 8 megapixel camera, which does 1080p video, and it isn't anything special, but it's good enough if you need it, just to use as like a scanner or if you don't have your phone near you. But at the end of the day, I'm sure some of you guys are wondering what exactly is the difference between the iPad and the iPad Pro. It is a pretty significant price difference. It still runs the same apps, and I would say in terms of everyday tasks, about 80% of the things that you're going to do on the iPad Pro, you're going to be able to do perfectly fine on the iPad. You have to understand though that the iPad Pro 10.5 inch and 13 inch are hardware powerhouses. The display is probably the best that you're going to find on any tablet for a while, being a 10.5 inch laminated display that is high resolution, has true tone, and essentially nothing to complain about it. And from a hardware standpoint, it is also a powerhouse in terms of processing power, even scoring higher than some of the MacBooks just off raw benchmarks in the baseline. It's also got the same camera as the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus, and also the higher refresh rate, which is very noticeably smooth, but if you don't compare them side by side, you're really not going to notice it. And also a total of 4 speakers for a better listening experience. I'd say if you completely rely on your iPad for everything at a very powerful scale, then the iPad Pro is going to be justifiable, but at just over $300, I think the iPad is a very, very good option, and you really won't regret buying it for the most part. If you're a student and have relatively basic needs in terms of what you need for school as a computer and also a multimedia device, then I think you're not going to have any problem with the iPad paired up with a keyboard like this. The pencil is obviously something that's going to be optional as to whether or not you're really going to need it. But if you have any questions about the iPad, let me know down in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.